There is a quiet moment, a stillness known only to you, when a door inside your soul clicks shut forever, and you realize with a calm and absolute certainty that you can never go back to the person you once were. Have you felt it? That peculiar sense of distance from the world you used to inhabit? Colors seem slightly muted. Conversations feel like they're happening through a pane of thick glass. No grand catastrophe announced this change. No dramatic ending. It arrived in the silence between heartbeats. Yet, here you are, and something within has shifted on a fundamental tectonic level. If you are hearing these words now, understand this. It is not a random event. It is a signal, a beacon. Depth psychology suggests that when an individual undergoes a specific, profound internal metamorphosis, their awareness becomes attuned to certain frequencies, like a radio suddenly finding a clear, new station. You are here because a part of you has already crossed a threshold most people will spend an entire lifetime consciously avoiding. This conversation is for those who sense that shift. If a deep, resonant knowing is stirring within you as I speak, a quiet, undeniable vibration of truth, consider this your confirmation. You have faced what few dare to face. You have walked through a fire that leaves no visible scar, but changes everything. And now, your entire existence is preparing to reorganize itself, silently and inevitably, around a new, more authentic center of gravity. Let us explore, in detail, what that truly means. The first sign you've passed through this unseen gateway is not celebration. It is not a feeling of victory or arrival. It is something far more subtle, infinitely more profound, and easily mistaken for something else entirely. 1. The unseen initiation. This is the moment you came face to face with the very architecture of your own unconscious mind. It is a private, solitary event, an interior ceremony with no witnesses. You may look back and identify a season, weeks, perhaps even months, where you moved through an experience that no one around you could truly comprehend or name. It wasn't fundamentally about a job loss or a relationship ending. Those were merely the outer circumstances, the visible keys that unlocked the door to the real, interior chamber. The true initiation was the direct, unmediated confrontation with the psychological fortress you had spent a lifetime constructing for mere survival. The Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung taught that we do not find enlightenment by chasing figures of light, but by consciously making an honest acquaintance with our own inner darkness. This is that sacred, difficult, and non-negotiable work. He spoke of the Nekia, the hero's descent into the underworld, not a physical journey to a literal place, but the visceral lived experience of being drawn down into your own psychic depths. You may have lived through this without having the words for it, a period where, on the surface, everything maintained its familiar shape. You went to work, you saw friends, you performed the routines, yet, inside, you were wandering a vast internal desert where all old landmarks had vanished. Passions that once burned brightly faded to a dull, indifferent gray. The social masks you wore felt heavier, more constricting, like costumes you'd outgrown. A deep, wordless, and paradoxically fertile emptiness took up residence in your core, as if life itself were gently but firmly prying your fingers away from a story you had finished reading long ago. Have you ever felt that quiet internal cracking, a sensation deep within your being, where you were utterly unsure whether to desperately hold the pieces together or to finally, mercifully, let them fall apart? That was the crucible. Its most defining feature? It guides you unerringly, mercilessly, directly to that which you have spent the most energy, your entire life, avoiding. If your deepest unspoken fear is a terror of insignificance, you are led into the stark, silent heart of your own perceived smallness. If you have armored yourself with constant frantic activity, you are placed in a soundproof chamber of enforced, terrifying stillness. If your entire identity has been woven from the opinions and validations of others, every external mirror will cloud over or shatter, leaving you with no reflection at all. This process is not a form of cosmic cruelty. It is the necessary, meticulous deconstruction of an old form, creating the hollow, sacred space from which a truer, more essential self can finally emerge. From the perspective of the unconscious, this is the established ego's final, most desperate line of defense. It senses its own impending end, and it fears dissolution above all else. That very fear, the existential dread that arises not from an external threat but from an internal ending, is the primary marker that the true transformation has irrevocably begun. Most people, when they feel the first tremors of this fear, instinctively retreat. They flood the unsettling silence with noise, with new obligations, with endless digital distraction, with superficial dramas, with anything and everything to avoid the hollow, echoing quiet where the real fateful meeting must occur. But if you, in those moments of profound unease, chose to remain present, if you chose to stay in the chair, to feel the emptiness, to listen to the silence even for a few agonizing minutes, then you accomplished what the vast majority never will. You showed up for your own rebirth. And the evidence of your passage is not what our achievement-oriented culture would have you believe. The sign you have emerged on the other side of that descent is not instant euphoria. It is not a constant state of bliss. It is instead a subtle but pervasive lightening. It is waking one ordinary morning and feeling the air enter your lungs more easily, as if an invisible weight on your chest has been lifted. It is an old, familiar anxiety that used to coil in your gut like a cold serpent now feeling distant, like a story you heard about someone else. It is a relationship dynamic that caused you cyclical pain for years suddenly appearing clear, logical, almost obvious, as if a heavy veil you never knew was there has been drawn aside. It is an old skin, shed without ceremony or sound. This is the quiet rebirth, the essential self beginning to take its first full breaths after the protective, but limiting, container of the old personality has finally cracked open. And if this message feels as though it has arrived at precisely the right moment in your life, if the timing feels eerily, personally significant, that is the working of synchronicity. When the deep psyche completes a major shift and moves to a new stage of development, the universe, or the unconscious itself, begins to send soft confirmatory signals. It is a way of saying, you are on frequency. Keep going. Which brings us, logically and inevitably, to the second major phase of this journey, where that old familiar identity finally begins its process of dissolution. 2. The Great Unraveling. When the initial descent completes its necessary cycle, you enter one of the most existentially disorienting transitions a human being can experience. The gradual, often terrifying, dissolution of your former self. This is not typically a loud, dramatic crisis that sends you to the hospital. It is a slow, persistent, inexorable shedding of a psychological costume you have been wearing for decades. It manifests as a profound, almost cellular ache, the deep sensation of something vital outgrowing its shell, pressing against boundaries that can no longer contain it. Jung termed this critical process ego death. It is the moment the constructed identity, the persona, the collection of stories, traits, and defenses you've called I, begins to soften, to liquefy, to lose its solidity. This softening permits the essence that has always existed beneath it, which has been waiting, patient and whole, to finally step forward into the space that has been cleared. It begins with internal murmurs, whispers that only your soul can truly hear. The professional titles, social roles, and family positions that once gave you a sense of confidence and place now feel like borrowed garments, ill-fitting, and not truly your own. The foundational stories you narrated to yourself, I am the resilient one, I know exactly what I want, my path is clear, suddenly sound hollow. Like lines recited from a forgotten play, you feel spiritually and psychologically untethered, adrift in a vast, open sky, with no compass. Yet, beneath the vertigo and the freefall sensation, a deeper, quieter knowing remains, an anchor in the storm. This unraveling is not a mistake. It is not a failure. It is as necessary and as natural as a forest shedding its autumn leaves to make way for the silent promise of spring growth. This dissolution, this great unraveling, is therefore not a sign of breaking down. It is the clearest possible signal that you are ready to graduate from the limiting, often constrictive framework your past constructed for mere survival. That framework served its purpose. It got you here. But now, you are being called beyond survival, into a state of being that is about thriving, about authenticity, about essence. Imagine, for a moment, a snake that has outgrown its skin. The old skin becomes a tight, dull, suffocating prison. It restricts movement, obscures perception. The vulnerable, energy-intensive process of slowing it off is exhausting, raw, and leaves the creature exposed. But it is the only possible way to grow, to allow for new, larger life. Your former ego is that skin. It served you. It protected you. It helped you navigate the complexities of the world. But when your inner being expands in consciousness, the old structure must release. There is no other way. What then is actually occurring within the intricate neurology of your brain when this core sense of who you are begins to transform? From a contemporary neuroscience standpoint, this period resembles a profound and systemic challenge to your deeply held self-narrative. When the foundational beliefs and assumptions that comprise your identity are called into question, the brain's default mode network, AMA inindeli mind null, the intricate circuitry responsible for your autobiographical story of self, for mind wandering and for social referencing, can become significantly less active. It is as if the internal narrator goes quiet. Meanwhile, the brain's older, more primal emotional and sensory processing centers, like the amygdala and the insula, may fire with heightened intensity. This is the neurobiological correlate of feeling emotionally raw, spiritually unmoored, sensorially overwhelmed, and utterly lacking in a clear sense of direction or purpose. But here is the crucial, hopeful insight. Within this apparent neural chaos, the brain is engaged in a silent, magnificent renovation. It is actively pruning away old, rigid neural connections that upheld the outdated self-concept. Simultaneously, it is preparing the biochemical and structural foundation for a more flexible, integrated, and authentic you to take shape. Science terms this adaptive neuroplasticity in the direct service of self-reorganization. Jung, a century earlier, called it the birth pangs of the individuated self. In that fertile, uncertain ground of not knowing, in the void left after the old story dissolves, a new movement of consciousness is born. This is not a maturity that can be earned through sheer effort or intellectual striving. It is a maturity that is received only through a posture of surrender, through the courage to not know, to not be for a little while. As Jung famously said, no tree can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. That descent into your own depths does not destroy you. It opens within you a capacity for wisdom, compassion, and depth that you could never have accessed from the safe, familiar plateau of your old identity. Those who have navigated this passage and emerged on the other side consistently describe a world that is permanently, irrevocably changed. Not because their external circumstances have necessarily altered in dramatic ways, but because their very perception of reality has been purified, clarified, stripped of its former distortions. Trivial concerns and social anxieties lose their gravitational pull. Ancient childhood-rooted fears lose their visceral sting. A new inner vastness opens up, a quiet, expansive, and deeply clear space within from which to perceive and engage with life. And it is precisely within this new, spacious inner landscape that you will start to notice the external world beginning to communicate with you in a mysterious, symbolic, and deeply personal language. 3. The language of meaning. As the old self dissolves and your internal landscape expands into a quieter, more receptive state, you may begin to detect something extraordinary happening at the edges of your ordinary awareness. The external, material world starts to act as a subtle mirror, reflecting your internal shift back to you in inexplicable, yet undeniably meaningful ways. You might notice a specific sequence of numbers appearing repeatedly in seemingly random places, on license plates, receipts, the time on a clock, and it feels personally significant, not just coincidental. A stranger in a coffee shop might make an offhand comment that directly addresses the silent question you've been carrying in your heart for weeks. A book you pull idly from a shelf might seem to fall open to the exact paragraph that speaks to your current dilemma with uncanny precision. Jung named this mysterious category of experience synchronicity, a causal connecting principle. He defined it as the experience of two or more events that are meaningfully related, but not causally linked. It is the symbolic dialect of the unconscious psyche, one of its primary methods for signaling that you have arrived at a new stage of inner development. After the ego dissolves and the inner noise diminishes, synchronicity is often the first recognizable whisper from a deeper, more intelligent layer of reality. For Jung, and for those who study this phenomenon, nothing in the genuine awakening process is truly random or meaningless. He proposed that synchronicity reveals an ever-present, underlying reality for those whose perception has become sufficiently refined. When your inner vibrational frequency changes, when you shift from a state of egoic contraction to one of more open, essential being, the outer world seems to respond in harmonic resonance, like one perfectly tuned string causing another to vibrate across the room. Most people, whose awareness is still clouded by the static of the old, busy, grasping ego, either dismiss these signs entirely or assign them to superstition. But you, having endured the dissolution of that noisy self, become a more refined, sensitive instrument. You don't just observe these events with detached curiosity. You feel the meaning shimmering through them. You sense the connective tissue between the inner state and the outer sign. Let me offer an example. Consider a man who, during a prolonged period of deep uncertainty about his life's direction, kept encountering the image of the heron. He saw a heron standing motionless in a marsh during his daily drive. A heron appeared in the background of a painting at a friend's house. He overheard a conversation about herons at the gym. The recurrence felt orchestrated, beyond mere chance. When he finally paused and asked himself, what could this creature possibly be trying to show me? He researched its symbolism. He found the heron is often associated with stillness, patience, and self-determination. Traits associated with standing on one's own 2 feet in transitional waters and waiting with focus for the right moment to act. The message was a direct, symbolic answer to his inner turmoil. Be still. Be patient. Your clarity and your moment will come from within this poised waiting. He began to cultivate that quality of stillness, and his path forward gradually clarified from the inside out. Synchronicity almost always operates in this gentle, non-invasive manner. It offers breadcrumbs, not a full map. Those breadcrumbs only form a coherent trail when you are psychologically and spiritually ready to walk it. What makes the experience of synchronicity so significant in this journey is that it typically becomes visible and interpretable only when individual consciousness reaches a certain level of maturation and quietude. When the ego is in full command, preoccupied with its plans, fears, and desires, this subtle channel of communication is largely muted, drowned out by internal noise. But when the shell of the old self fractures and a new inner silence is born, the communication can flow freely. You become a better receiver. In the ancient myths and heroes' journeys found across all cultures, the seeker is often given a modest, seemingly insignificant talisman at the outset. A simple feather, a smooth stone from a riverbed, a worn coin. It appears worthless. But as the journey progresses, that humble object repeatedly becomes a crucial guide, a tool, or a key. Synchronicity is your modern psychological talisman. It is not the final answer or the destination itself. It is the trail marker, the thread in the labyrinth, leading you ever onward toward your own center. You need not, and indeed should not, spend your energy hunting for these signs or forcing meaning onto random events. That is the ego trying to co-opt the process. Your task is simpler and more profound: to cultivate a state of quiet receptivity and to practice acknowledging synchronicity when it spontaneously appears. Its mere presence is a quiet but powerful affirmation from the depths of your own being. You are exactly where you need to be. You are seeing exactly what you are ready to see. Trust this. And this new, refined, receptive awareness, honed by the dissolution and attuned to symbolic language, now grants you the necessary courage and stability to undertake the next, most courageous phase of the work, finally facing what you have long exiled within the hidden chambers of your own psyche. 4. The reconciliation of exiles. As synchronicity offers its gentle, ongoing guidance, it often simultaneously prepares the ground for the next, deeper and more demanding phase of the journey, the conscious encounter with your shadow. This term, often misunderstood, does not refer to a cartoonish dark side or a repository of evil intentions. In Jungian psychology, the shadow represents the exiled self, the totality of those aspects, impulses, qualities, and potentials within you that you have, over a lifetime, deemed unacceptable, shameful, weak, embarrassing, or incompatible with your chosen self-image, and have consequently pushed out of conscious awareness. When the old ego, the gatekeeper of that chosen self-image, dissolves or weakens, you can no longer effectively keep these exiled parts locked in the psychological cellar. The locks lose their strength. The door begins to swing open of its own accord. You might suddenly notice flashes of a grief you thought you'd neatly packaged away decades ago. You might feel surges of an anger you've always prided yourself on not having. You might encounter secret longings, vulnerabilities, creative impulses, or needs for dependency that you've hidden behind a carefully maintained facade of strength, independence, or stoicism. Jung stated with characteristic clarity, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." The moment you dare to turn a compassionate, non-judgmental gaze toward these exiled parts, to look at them without immediately flinching away or trying to rebury them, a radical, life-altering process of integration begins. Picture, if you will, a long-neglected locked room in the vast mansion of your spirit. You have walked past its sealed door every day for years, perhaps decades. You've been told, and you've told yourself, that monsters live inside. One day, armed with nothing but the lantern of your own awakening awareness, you find the courage to turn the old rusted key and push the door open. You step inside, heart pounding, and raise your light. You find no monsters. Instead, you discover lost heirlooms of your soul, forgotten talents, faded portraits of younger, more vulnerable versions of yourself, suppressed emotions that hold immense energy, and innate gifts you dismissed as frivolous long ago. All of them are parts of your inherent wholeness, waiting patiently in the dark to be welcomed home, acknowledged and reintegrated into the household of your conscious life. Your shadow is that room. Shadow work is the process of cleaning it out, turning on the lights, and deciding what to keep. Integration, it must be emphasized, is not about fixing bad parts or overcoming flaws. That is the language of the judgmental ego. Integration is about allowing every facet of your being, the so-called positive and negative, the strong and the vulnerable, the socially acceptable and the privately shameful, to have a legitimate seat at the table of your consciousness. It is moving from a state of inner civil war to a state of inner diplomacy. Let me illustrate with a story. A woman, let's call her Maya, had built her entire identity around being the rock for everyone, endlessly patient, reliably strong, the one who never cracked. During her integration phase, she found herself experiencing uncharacteristic irritability and snapping over minor inconveniences. She felt horrified, believing she was becoming a worse, more impatient person. In a moment of painful but honest reflection, guided by her new awareness, she asked herself a terrifying question. Is my legendary patience truly a form of spiritual kindness? Or has it been, all along, a deep-seated fear of conflict, a subconscious belief that if I ever express a need, set a boundary, or show frustration, I will be abandoned or deemed unlovable? The truth, when it finally surfaced into the light of her consciousness, did not bring shame. It brought immense, liberating relief and profound self-compassion. The immense psychic energy she had been using to suppress her legitimate needs and feelings was suddenly freed. That energy could now be redirected into setting healthy boundaries and engaging in relationships from a place of authentic choice, not fear-based performance. Shadow work proceeds with a blend of unwavering courage and gentle compassion, never with force or self-aggression. You do not need to, and indeed cannot, excavate the entire cellar in one heroic, exhausting session. The process is incremental. Simply shine the lantern of your awareness into one dusty corner at a time. Acknowledge what you find there. Say, this too is a part of me. Breathe with it. The rest will reveal itself in its own right time, as you develop the capacity to hold it. When the shadow is met not with rejection, but with the steady light of conscious awareness, a distinct and palpable process of inner unification occurs. You begin to feel a movement towards psychological wholeness. You expend far less precious life energy on the daily performance of maintaining a polished, partial self-image. You feel more solid, more real, less fragmented. And from this newly integrated, more authentic place of inner unity, your external life naturally begins to flow in a more congruent, self-directed, and meaningful direction. This hard-won inner wholeness does not remain a private experience. It creates a seismic shift in your perception, which in turn fundamentally alters how you perceive and relate to every single person in your world. It leads to one of the most liberating milestones on the entire journey. 5. The reclamation of sovereign power. As you bravely and consistently integrate pieces of your shadow, as you bring the exiled parts home, a powerful internal alchemy occurs. You gradually begin to withdraw your projections. This is a milestone Jung considered absolutely essential for achieving true psychological maturity and adulthood. It represents a monumental shift in how you experience the world. Before the Great Passage, we often live as if the external world is a blank cinema screen upon which we project the unresolved dramas, conflicts, and qualities of our own inner world. We unconsciously believe that other people make us feel insecure, envious, resentful, or inadequate. We attribute the cause of our emotional states to their actions, their words, their mere existence. In psychological truth, those emotions and reactions reside within us, as part of our own unintegrated shadow material. Other people merely act as triggers. They brush against these dormant, unhealed, and unconscious places within us, causing them to erupt into our awareness. The pivotal moment of growth occurs when you stop the automatic, outward-focused thought of, "They are causing my pain," or "She is making me so angry," and instead you turn the inquiry inward. You ask, with genuine curiosity and without self-blame, why does this specific person's behavior, or this particular interaction, touch such a deep and raw wound within me? What unhealed part of myself is being activated here? This simple shift in questioning marks the crossing of a critical frontier in consciousness. Jung observed, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. That moment of inward-turning curiosity is the true beginning of reclaiming your full sovereign power. We can understand this biologically as well. Projection is, in part, a form of unconscious emotional transference. The amygdala, a deep brain structure that acts as a storehouse for past emotional injuries and fear memories, can react to a present-day person or situation as if it were a historical threat. It bypasses the slower, rational processing of the prefrontal cortex. You feel attacked, and you react defensively, often to a threat that exists 90% in your past, 10% in your present. As you psychologically mature and integrate your shadow, the prefrontal cortex, the seat of discernment, emotional regulation, and perspective-taking, engages more reliably and powerfully. It helps you separate past pain from present reality, allowing you to respond rather than blindly react. Withdrawing your projections does not render you passive, indifferent, or a doormat. On the contrary, it makes you quietly, unshakably authoritative in your own inner realm. You stop, by degrees, handing other people the remote control to your emotional state. You realize, experientially, that what intensely irritates or fascinates you in another person is very often a reflection of a disowned, unintegrated quality within yourself. Conversely, what you deeply admire or are drawn to in others can frequently point to a latent potential, a dormant strength, or an unlived aspect of life asleep in your own soul, waiting to be awakened and claimed. Consider a story. A person named David spent years in his professional life feeling chronically disrespected and overlooked by his colleagues and superiors. Every meeting was an agony of perceived slights and subtle dismissals. During his conscious transformation, through the practice of shadow work, he came to understand that the intense, crippling sting of these interactions was rooted not in the present actions of his peers, but in a much older, childhood-derived narrative of being less than, of never being quite good enough for a critical parental figure. He had been unconsciously projecting that entire ancient story, that old wound, onto every glance, every email, every piece of feedback in his current workplace. When he consciously withdrew that projection, when he reclaimed that story as his old wound and not their current intention, a miracle occurred. The social and professional anxiety that had plagued him for years simply dissolved. The people in his office did not change their behavior overnight. His perception of their behavior changed entirely. He was free. When you withdraw projections, the world ceases to be a perpetual battlefield or a courtroom where you are always on trial. It transforms into a reflection pool, a sometimes murky, sometimes clear mirror, showing you aspects of your own being. You reclaim the vast reservoirs of life force energy that were once incessantly spent on blame, defensiveness, resentment, and envy. You stand, finally, upon an unassailable inner foundation of self-knowledge and self-ownership. And from this solid, authentic foundation, your entire existence begins to silently, organically, and inevitably reorder itself. A new phase dawns. 6. The silent reconfiguration of reality. Once you begin to consistently perceive the world through clarified eyes, free from the gross distortions of projection and the filters of an outdated self-image, a new and fascinating chapter of the journey unfolds. Life itself, in a mysterious but palpable way, begins to restructure itself around your new, coherent, integrated frequency. Jung termed this overarching process individuation, the lifelong journey toward becoming the unique, undivided individual you inherently are. A critical aspect of this is a quiet, powerful realignment of your life's very trajectory. This reconfiguration is not marked by loud fanfare, dramatic announcements, or sudden windfalls. It is felt in a series of gentle, persistent, internal tugs and external nudges. Deep connections that once felt absolutely essential to your sense of self may naturally, peacefully loosen their grip. This occurs not from dramatic conflict, explosive arguments, or betrayal, but from a simple, quiet mismatch in fundamental vibration or life direction. A career path or professional identity that once felt secure, prestigious, and defining may begin to feel subtly constricting. Like a suit you've outgrown, the sleeves are too short, the shoulders too tight. You may feel a quiet but insistent pull toward new interests, new forms of contribution, new horizons, even in the complete absence of a detailed, logical, five-step plan. In this space, your intuition, that quiet gut-level knowing, transitions from being an occasional whisper to becoming your most trusted primary compass for navigation. The process can be likened to the Earth's magnetic poles undergoing a slow geological shift. The shift itself is invisible and silent, but because of it, every magnetic compass needle on the planet, representing your habits, your relationships, your opportunities, your daily choices, gradually, inevitably, begins to swing and settle, pointing toward a new true north. You change at the molten core of your being, and the entire visible landscape of your life follows suit, reorganizing around that new center of gravity. We can find powerful examples of this in the biographies of those who have undergone profound transformations. Consider the metamorphosis of someone like Viktor Frankl. In the unimaginable crucible of the Nazi concentration camps, his old identity, as a doctor, a husband, a member of society, and his entire external world were utterly and brutally destroyed. In that absolute abyss, he was forced to find a new, unshakable center. He discovered that his fundamental freedom, the one thing that could not be taken from him, was his ability to choose his attitude toward his suffering, to find meaning in it. This was not a philosophical idea. It was a lived, psychological reorientation at the deepest level. After his survival, his entire subsequent life, his seminal work in logotherapy, his writing, his teaching, his very legacy, flowed not from a desire to chase happiness or rebuild a lost past, but from that core, reoriented principle of meaning-seeking. His new life was constructed entirely around the profound frequency he discovered in the very depths of hell. When you enter this stage of silent reconfiguration, you will likely notice the emergence of a new quality of flow in your life. What is genuinely meant for you, what resonates with your authentic being, begins to find its way to you with less struggle. Decision-making often becomes simpler, less fraught with paralyzing anxiety. Pathways and resources you need appear more readily, often as you approach them, not years in advance. This is not about manifesting through sheer willpower or positive thinking alone. That is often the ego's last attempt to control the process. This is about an alignment so deep and complete that you begin to move with the current of your own destiny, rather than exhausting yourself by swimming perpetually against it. So, after navigating all of this profound inner terrain, the descent, the dissolution, the synchronicity, the shadow work, the withdrawal of projections, and the life reconfiguration, what is the ultimate reward? What is the final destination? It is not what our hyper-achievement, consumerist culture would typically have you believe or chase. 7. The immovable center. The true, lasting prize for enduring the final passage and committing to the ongoing journey of individuation is not a state of permanent, fleeting euphoria. It is not the accumulation of worldly acclaim, status symbols, or material proof of your transformation. Those may or may not come, but they are side effects, not the essence. The essence is something infinitely more valuable and enduring, the cultivation of an immovable, inner tranquility, a foundational serenity and stability that no external event, no change in fortune, no opinion of another, and no internal storm of passing emotion can ultimately dismantle. This state does not typically feel like a triumphant, chest-thumping fanfare. It feels, more often, like finally coming home to yourself after a very long and confusing journey. It arrives not with fireworks, but softly, like the profound, deeply nourishing quiet that settles over the land after a long century-spanning reign has finally passed. You begin to operate from a centered core, not because you are trying very hard to be calm and spiritual, but because the internal civil war has largely ceased. The conflicting sub-personalities have been heard and integrated. There is less to fight against, within or without. Jung spoke of this state as the experience of the self, the total, integrated personality that stands for the conscious union of the ego with the unconscious. He wrote, "In all chaos there is a cosmos, in all disorder a secret order." When you touch, even intermittently, that secret inner order of the integrated self, everything in your life, your relationships, your work, your challenges, begins to find its natural, rightful orbit around you. You become the stable, silent axis mundi, the world tree at the center of your own universe. In the most practical, day-to-day terms, this translates into a fundamental change in your experience of being alive. You cease to be so easily emotionally hijacked by minor events or the moods of others. You no longer crave or desperately seek external validation to feel worthy or secure. Your old psychological triggers lose their overwhelming potency. They may still be touched, but they no longer launch you into automatic, unconscious reactions. You begin to respond to life from a place of considered choice, instead of reacting to it from a place of ingrained habit or fear. You find you can communicate your truth with clarity and compassion, without slipping into defensiveness or aggression. Imagine a deep, high mountain lake at dawn, its surface utterly still and glassy. It is in that perfect stillness that it can clearly, accurately, and beautifully reflect the sky above, the surrounding peaks, the trees along its shore. Your mind, once turbulent and choppy with the winds of ego, now can become still enough to reflect reality, both inner and outer, with a startling, unclouded clarity. Let me ground this with a final example. A professional woman, let's call her Sarah, had built a successful career, but had always been hypersensitive to any form of criticism or feedback. Interpreting it as a personal attack and a confirmation of her hidden insecurities, after moving through her own deep process of transformation, after integrating her shadow of perceived inadequacy, she found herself in a performance review with a direct, blunt boss. The boss offered the same type of critical feedback she had always received. But this time, Sarah noticed something miraculous. The feedback landed, but it elicited zero internal panic, shame, or defensive anger. She felt calm. She could listen objectively. The feedback itself hadn't magically changed. Her unconscious need to defend a fragile, unintegrated self-image had dissolved. She was free to truly listen, to genuinely learn from what was useful, and to calmly let go of what was not. That is the freedom of the immovable center. This is the ultimate gift of the journey. It moves you from a life of constant, exhausting reaction to the past, to others, to your own fears, into a life of authentic, grounded creation. You are no longer automatically drafted into battles that are not yours to fight. You choose your engagements, your commitments, and your relationships from a place of wholeness, discernment, and genuine purpose. The fact that this message resonates with you now, at this moment in your life, is itself a potential synchronistic event. The psyche has a mysterious intelligence. It brings you into contact with the ideas, the people, and the symbols that match your exact level of readiness and your current stage of development. This resonance you may feel is a quiet nod from your own deeper self, a confirmatory whisper. You have faced what many flee. You have passed through the fire of the final test. You are not imagining this. You are on the path. No external institution will hand you a certificate for this passage. No diploma will mark its completion. The proof is inscribed in the quiet, ongoing revolution of your daily existence, in the newfound steadiness of your gaze, in the ancient fears that no longer govern your choices, in the grounded, compassionate presence you now bring to your relationships and your endeavors. If this detailed journey has mirrored your own inner experience, if you see your story reflected in these stages, then mark this moment. Click the like button on this video. It is a silent, digital affirmation of your own profound courage and it acts as a signal to the algorithm, helping this message reach other souls who are standing, trembling or hopeful, at their own threshold, seeking language for their experience. If you know someone in your life who is navigating this terrain and needs to hear this map described, share this video with them privately. And consider subscribing to this channel, Shehzad Hussain, if you wish to continue exploring these psychological and spiritual depths together. We delve into practical shadow work, Jungian archetypes, the neuroscience of transformation, and the art of building a life of meaning, because what we have discussed today is not an ending point. It is the essential beginning of learning how to live from an entirely different center, your own true, authentic, and immovable center.